My name is Chris Elliott, and today we have Alex with us. He built an Amazon empire starting with zero capital and making $15 million in 6 years. So first of all, Alex, let us know who you are.
Yeah, Chris, thanks very much for having us. So as Chris said there, Alex, I've been selling online actually since 2004. I actually started with eBay. I've had experience about just about every marketplace because I'm naturally curious and I always want to see what each one has to offer and where the best kind of return of investment is. More recently, in the last kind of 5-6 years, I have built my business on Amazon. Prior to that, I had time, did 6.5 years in the British Army, followed by time in the financial services sector. Before I then kind of went out on my own. Currently living in London, looking at making a move back out to Dubai. I actually grew up here, so very familiar with this space. But I love all things e-commerce. I love talking about all things business, and not just e-commerce businesses, but we chat about business setup stuff because I find it really interesting listening to kind of the different models that everyone else uses and seeing if I can apply that to what I do. And I think that's the role of the business owner is to kind of be out there and see what can be applied. If you keep looking at the same stuff over and over and over again, you're going to look exactly the same as everyone else's businesses.
And what made you start your Amazon business in the first place? Did you have any, big experience in the beginning, or did you have any mentors? Tell me a bit about the story.
Yeah, so interestingly, so almost like a bit of a cliche. I get asked this a lot, like, how did you get into selling on Amazon? I had moved back from Dubai in about 2016, back to London, and I was kind of looking for something to do. And as you browse the internet, undoubtedly everyone who's probably watching this has been bombarded with those YouTube ads. You do one click and suddenly the algorithm is just hammering you with, Amazon gurus trying to sell you some course. And I was like, this is exhausting. I don't want anything to do with this. It was a friend of mine who I was just casually chatting to one day on WhatsApp or something. And they said, hey, have a watch on my friend's YouTube channel. He's doing this thing. So I had a look on it. And it's basically, he was doing this kind of challenge, 0 to 100K. On Amazon. Immediately I dismissed it. I was like, listen, I'm not interested in any of this. It's like, I've seen this stuff before. I'm just not interested. And she said, no. Like, I know the guy. He's an ex kind of physical commodities trader. He's just doing it for fun. He doesn't need the money. It's just a bit of a project that he can do with his son. So it's going to be, authentic. And I was like, that's the only reason I watched it. It was because it was a referral. Everything else I'd always seen with a pinch of salt. Everyone just kind of talking about how great it was to sell you something, whereas he was just doing it as a kind of look in the life of. So I watched a few of those, and I think the first step for me, which I often use when I'm exploring new ideas, is kind of what's the minimum amount of effort that I have to put in to get the next bit of validation that I should continue with this. And that was it really. So I kind of saw what he was doing. I thought, it looks like it works. I kind of, like, through referral, by association, I trust this guy. What he's saying is genuine. And I just ordered a few pieces, didn't really think much of it, and sent it into Amazon just to kind of see how it worked, how the wheels turned. The first kind of few shipments I did, or first things I bought were, I laugh about them now in terms of the way I packaged things up and just put some brown tape around it and threw it to UPS. And that was it. That was literally it. I just kind of started off purchasing a few items to test the model and saw that it could work, not necessarily with the things that I had bought, but started going along those lines. So I started off in arbitrage. So there's the two models on Amazon. Two main ones is you kind of got your private label, where you brand up your own stuff and you kind of create your own listings and you kind of build a brand. And then the other side of the same coin is arbitrage, split into kind of retail arbitrage and online arbitrage, which essentially is reselling. So buying well-known brands for a cheaper price and then trying to resell them for a higher price on marketplaces, in this case, Amazon. And that's the model that I predominantly employed for the first 4 to 5 years of the business. Easy to get going, smaller margins, but allowed me to kind of test and get to know the platform. But yeah, simply just watching a YouTube video and just thinking, what can I do to dip my toe in and see if this thing works?
Nice. And very important question. Why haven't you put yourself out to the audience beforehand? YouTube, Instagram, because usually when you do a business like that, most of the people, they sell themselves. So what's the reason behind that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We chatted about this earlier. Like, the number one reason is just I've been too busy. When you're kind of running these size of businesses and you've got 20 staff, I didn't necessarily have time to be filming everything all the time. And there's actually a really interesting kind of, I'd say fact, but something to consider is most of the people that are trying to sell you the dream are making more money on YouTube selling you courses, and they are actually doing the thing that they're trying to tell you to do, which, felt really, really inauthentic. So whenever I would kind of watch their stuff, I knew from what they were saying that it wasn't the whole truth, or what they were saying, actually, some of it was just wrong, because I'd been in the business for so long. But I was more interested in, just getting my head down and just doing my own work at the end of the day. It is something that I've started to do. I've got my own YouTube channel, which is Ecom Alex. And I am starting to share more helpful tips and tricks of stuff that I've learned. And I do have my Facebook group, which is about 2,500 in there of Amazon sellers. And it's not really for any purpose, to try and sell anything. It's just to kind of share my knowledge, make connections, and see where it goes from there. But I've never been, one to put myself out there, but it's mostly just time at the end of the day. But I have started to share more stuff, because I do have a lot of knowledge I've built up over the years. And I like connecting with people and discussing about business and seeing where things go.
Alex, can you walk us through your steps in the last couple of years, how you have built this Amazon empire from year to year?
So started off literally buying, single items and testing out the market, get a bit of validation. I actually then stepped into kind of retail arbitrage, which is where you physically go to stores and pick it up, and kind of went that direction because the margins were much higher in that space. And the reason that is the stock that I was able to get hold of was a lot less people had access to it. When you're involved in online arbitrage, what you often find is everyone has access to the same thing, which, because it's a marketplace, you have price compression. But through retail arbitrage, I was able to, with limited funds, I was able to kind of scale the business with the assets that I had. Once you grow to a certain point, you can't spend enough. In retail arbitrage, you're physically limited by capital, able to spend capital. So if you go to a store, they might only have 10 or 15 units of it, and you've got 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 pounds that you need to spend, because you make money when you spend money. And if you can't spend it, then it's lost profit. So you get to a point where you've kind of hit a glass ceiling with with retail arbitrage. You can't spend it fast enough, but also the physical prep time. You've got to bring it home, you've got to package it, you've got to send to Amazon. That all erodes into your kind of total profit you could make. So went from that, kind of transitioned into the online arbitrage space, which, once you're armed with a credit card and just time, you can go from buying 15 units to buying 100 units in kind of one go on your card or with wholesalers. So you're able to scale it a lot faster and a lot bigger. I would say the margins do decrease because you haven't got as limited access to those deals. Like, everyone else can also see them, which means that you scale, the margins go down because everyone else is buying them and the prices come down, but total profit is able to grow. From there, hired my first kind of virtual assistant to kind of take off some of the load, and then kind of scaled up from there. And eventually, kind of early last year, we had nearly 20 staff, all out in the Philippines, predominantly where we've, actually not predominantly, only where we've hired from. And we were active, or are active, in the US, the UK, and the EU. So we have warehouses in Scunthorpe, the Czech Republic, Montana, and Ohio. I never touch any of the goods. It would go to those warehouses, then get sent to the individual fulfillment centers. And I set up teams or hired teams and built them out so that they could source, purchase, and ship products within each of those marketplaces to then be sold and kind of run as an efficient machine. So I did that for about 3-4 years. And then at the back end of 2020, I was approached by some of my ex-co-founders to establish one of the Amazon aggregators. Now, there was a big wave back in 2020, 2021, where these kind of, a lot of investor money, venture capital money went into Amazon aggregators. And in short, what we did was we would look for promising Amazon native brands, and we look to acquire them and then grow them and scale them, economies of scales, and going forward. So in that, we raised into, the multi-million pounds through venture capital, some leading San Francisco funds, and we acquired a number of brands and kind of scaled those. And the biggest acquisition we made was kind of in the 8-figure range. We bought a brand. So that's when we kind of stepped into the private label. When I stepped into private label space, and immediately kind of purchased the revenue and kind of grew the businesses from there. And there's some really interesting businesses in there. Learned a lot about kind of Amazon native only brands and kind of how they are to be treated as assets. And actually the bubbles kind of burst on that model, the acquisition model as a whole. A lot of money got pumped into it. There was a big land grab, asset values got inflated, and a lot of people got left, hung out to dry. We did okay because when we started the business, we could see that there was this land grab going on and asset values were inflating beyond what they were actually worth. So I stepped away from that business in 2022, and it's still going. It's still running. I still have some equity in it, and hopefully in the near future, it'll kind of scale, grow, get sold, and I'll be able to kind of realize some of the work that I put into that. But I then refocused back onto my existing business, kind of back into the arbitrage space, grew that, and actually now we're going through a period of transition again, where, something we'll get into in this chat, where, I realized that we weren't necessarily building asset value, we were building cash flow. And even then the cash flow wasn't stable. So as we were going, in the business which I owned solely on my own, we're kind of at 4 or 5 million turnover. And every day we were growing, but it felt like we were getting further and further into the mud. Like I felt this weight, this pain. And it didn't feel that the direction of travel we were going in was correct. So I knew that we had to transition away from being so reliant on marketplaces, i.e. Amazon, and start to do something where we were building asset value and not just cash flow. So actually we've kind of regressed in terms of our revenue quite drastically in employee numbers, and then redirecting our efforts to kind of grow in to build a more sustainable business. And I don't mean sustainable in eco-friendly cardboard packaging way. I mean sustainable business model. Previously what I'd built was, as soon as you stopped running, much like a consultancy, the money stops coming in. There was no kind of forward momentum. And that's a problem. We were reselling other people's brands. We were heavy into the health and beauty space. So we did a lot of skincare, a lot of high-end fragrances. And that, has its own inherent problems with brands not wanting to sell their stuff and, complaints or customer damage returns, because that's the way some of those buyers are. But what we were finding is we were just doing more and more sales, but actually we were just also getting more and more problems. And none of the effort that I was putting in, it really felt like I was pushing water uphill, and I was just sprinting all the time, and it's exhausting. And it wasn't the right direction for me or for the business at the end of the day. So having to take time to reverse that and kind of go in a better direction, which I think is the way forward, not to be so reliant on marketplaces.
And Alex, how did you come to research the right products for your Amazon store? What markets did you check? Did you import them? Did you use any special tools for it?
Yeah, so I'll answer it with two different caps on. First off, kind of the arbitrage hat on, where it's a lot more rudimentary. It's really about looking at the data for what is selling. The business model of arbitrage is actually quite simple, which has its pros and cons. I guess the pros really are that you don't have to worry about too much. You just have to worry about getting it as cheap as possible and how or at what price you can possibly sell it at. You don't need to work about marketing. You don't need to worry about trying to increase the price or anything like that. Does this buy price work for this sell price and move forward? So a lot of the research is very numbers based. It's what can I buy this product at? Does it sell? And what could I sell it for? And does that profit then make sense for the risks that we're taking? The software we use for that predominantly is SellerAmp. It's a piece of software that was developed by a former arbitrage seller, Al Carton, super nice guy. Keeper, which is a industry standard really for kind of data analysis. And then we have a profit dashboarding. I know you use Sellerboard, I use Seller Toolkit, much the same, but just something where we can see how things are going in terms of profitability. The other piece of software that you definitely do need is what's called a repricer, which will be adjusting your prices automatically, so you're not having to constantly check it all the time. And it's really important to do that, because if you're not priced competitively, you won't get any sales. So all the effort you put into sourcing and researching before buying the product will be kind of wasted because you're just not priced effectively. And all these pieces of software are actually really, really cheap. So I think SellerAmp, I pay, £150 for the year. So that's give or take £10 a month. Keeper is €19 a month. Again, not that much money. Seller Toolkit is about £15 or £20 a month. Not that much money. And then the repricer is also, so Seller Toolkit has two. It has the profit dashboard, but also the repricer built in. And that costs about £20 for that. So all in all, it's not a very expensive kind of software setup. When it comes to private label, that's where there's a lot more upfront research, because you're going to be spending a lot more capital. With arbitrage, you can spend £5, £10 or whatever on one unit of one thing and then test and see how it goes. With private label, you're having to make a much bigger purchase quantity, 200, 300, 400 units at a time. And it's also the labor cost that's going to go into it, your time of researching whether this particular product with these adaptations or improvements is going to sell. And even then, there's a bit of risk when it comes to it. So when it comes to private label, the real big thing that you want to be looking at, and the market has moved. Like if you asked me 5 or 6 years ago where private label was at, it was really about the kind of industry standard was just see what someone else is doing and it's selling really well, and then just copy what they've done and just improve on a few things, improve the listing, very, very basic kind of improvements, kind of level 1, we'd call it, improve the listing, improve the pictures, and then kind of just send it back out. That's been done to death now. And that kind of approach and that kind of methodology, if someone's selling that, it just does not work. Like those kind of low hanging fruit opportunities are just not there. Within private label, fundamentally, the bar has been raised. You really do need to put in the legwork into product research and actually really understand the customer avatar. What do they want? So I wouldn't say necessarily that the cost of entry in terms of having to buy more inventory has gone up. It's more about the time cost. It's not as you can just throw some mud at the wall and see what sticks. Because everyone can just look at a listing that's doing well and try and improve the pictures. It's actually really drilling down and understanding the customer's needs and what do they actually want out of this product. So now it's kind of moved more towards differentiation. How are you going to differentiate this product? And that then also gets supported by the other metrics. Like how do you know that this thing is going to sell? And in the private label space, keyword analysis is far, far more important. And that's the general traffic that people are searching for. Like how are people going to find this item? Much like footfall on a high street, you want to make sure that there's enough footfall going to be going past the store, i.e. your product, where you're going to place it. And the different keywords are all the different routes, and the more routes there are that you could possibly be at the intersection of, the better. And again, that all kind of comes part of the product selection, product research kind of phase to make sure that you give yourself the best chance of success. So yeah, it's definitely the bar has raised with that. And in terms of private label, the staples really there are Helium 10. It has a lot of stuff in there. You can use Jungle Scout. I personally prefer Helium 10. It works better in the European marketplaces, I feel, than Jungle Scout. I like the interface a bit more. I actually also have used Titan tools, which is part of the Titan Mastermind. You only get access to that if you're a Titan and you pay for that mastermind. It's actually a very good mastermind. They are on the bleeding edge of private label. Well worth joining if you're kind of in that space. Not cheap, but worth the money. And that really is towards building and developing products. You still do need a profit dashboard because really interesting, we were saying earlier, I've met, and I know people who have met a fair few kind of 7, 8, 9-figure sellers who actually either don't know their profitability or know it and they're not making any money. So you really do need to have a good grounding on your book. So overarching across all of them is having a good handle on your business numbers. And that goes across any business it is, So we use Xero for accounting, and it's super, super important to make sure that those are up to date as quickly and often as possible. And you do review those regularly because you want to know how the business is doing in terms of health-wise and to make those critical decisions, whether you kill a product line or you kill a division like we did. The EU just wasn't producing the fruit for the kind of return on capital employed that we wanted. And we made the decision to just cull it. We gave it enough time to say, hey, if this doesn't improve, it's just not worth the time and effort that we're putting into to get this return back. We'd rather focus that on the other teams. And you make that tough call just to cut it. You can only make that call if you can do it just finger in the air, gut feeling. But the better way of doing things is if you have the data to support it, which you'll get from your profit dashboards and more importantly, your accounting software, Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, whichever one it is that you decide to use. Those are kind of the fundamental ones. Other bits and bobs, everything else can be outsourced. Private label, if you can have some Photoshop stuff, but you can also outsource that. The only fundamental one that you really need to own is Helium 10, and within that'll kind of contain everything that you need. You don't need Keeper, you don't need SellerAmp, you don't need any of the other software when it comes to private label. It's just kind of Helium 10.
So thank you, Alex. So this was part 1, speaking to Alex about his Amazon journey, how he built it. And on part 2, we will continue the questions on his Amazon business and how he will scale his future and what his future plans are if he's going to be in Dubai, in London, or anywhere else in the world.